Well, good evening, folks, and welcome along to our other impromptu SPFL show here on the Rabble Network. Just after last night, when we thought everything was done and dusted for the season, we'd have a quiet period of time. As always in the SPFL, having none of it. This morning, the news that caught a few by surprise, perhaps not everybody, it has to be said, but many people by surprise, that Tony Docherty has indeed been sacked by Dundee, him and his entire coaching staff, after they survived the potential of a relegation playoff by beating St Johnstone on Sunday afternoon. You would have thought that might have been enough to keep Tony Docherty alive and kicking. Hasn't turned out to be the case. So we're going to have a quick wee half-hour chat about that. About what's next. Sean Maloney seems to be the main name getting mentioned at the moment. And seeing as how we've got Peter with us, we're going to pick his brains a little bit about Motherwell's end of the season and what could be next for them in the summer. With me to have a chat about all this, I have Demi. Demi, how we doing?
Freezing. Glad the season's over. But apart from that, I'm all right. Yourself?
I'm not too bad, not too bad. And Peter, how are we?
I'm not freezing. I'm kind of glad the season's over. It's been a Motherwell fans use this phrase as I'm the Motherwell roller coaster, and I think that's probably pretty accurate this year. But I think it should be an interesting summer, but we'll touch on that later, I think.
We will, and I'm also reliably informed that a big opportunity to mention the fact that it's officially been announced today as well that Derek McInnes is the new manager of Hearts. That's something we all knew was happening. That's why he wasn't in the dugout yesterday, and why Chris Buck took caretaker charge of Hearts of Kilmarnock. So we'll delve into that a little bit later. One in, one out syndrome, I feel. But first of all, Demi, as we said this morning, it was announced Tony Docherty had left Dundee, having finished 10th in the league. And of course, I mean, I'd mentioned this remark yesterday, they actually only finished with a point less than what they got last year, because they get 42 points last season, but finished top 6 this season. They get 41, finishing obviously 10th. I'll just read out Dundee's statement before I get your opinions on it, Demi. So Dundee released a statement this morning saying that Dundee Football Club can today confirm that manager Tony Docherty, Stuart Taylor, Alan Colm and Graham Henderson have been relieved of their duties at the football club with immediate effect. Tony was first appointed as manager of Dundee in May 2023 after the club was promoted to the Scottish Premiership, and in his first season in charge guided the club to a top 6 finish in the league. Stuart was brought in as assistant manager to Tony in June 2023. Alan has been with the club since 2021 as goalkeeping coach, and Graham joined last summer as head of performance. Sunday's result confirmed the club's place in the Scottish Premiership for next season. However, this season the results of the team have not met the standards expected by the club, with the club finishing in 10th position, 1 place above the relegation playoff position. The club have taken the decision to relieve Tony of his duties. The club would like to place on record its sincere thanks to Tony, Stuart, Alan and Graham for all of the work they have put into the club during their time with Dundee. We wish them all the best for the future. The club intends at this juncture to restructure the football department, and the process to appoint the new management team begins immediately. A mouthful there from Dundee, but it sounds, Demi, as though despite staying up, the club obviously not happy with the direction of travel under Tony Docherty this season.
Yeah, I mean, it's a strange one because, the way that they're going on about expectations of the club and all that, Dundee, sort of, in the last few years under different management, obviously they got relegated, but even prior to that, and barring last season, they generally do tend to finish in the bottom 6 of the table. And, last season obviously being the exception. So yeah, it's a bit bizarre, especially given some of the results that they picked up along the way. They took points off of, both sides of the Old Firm. They almost beat us both twice in the same week. So yeah, it's a bit of a strange one, but I think their expectations seem to be bigger than I think what the reality should be. Saying that it's an unacceptable league position to finish, but for a club like Dundee, is it? But I think if you're looking at the money that they've spent, potentially they should have finished higher. But like you've just said there, they finished a point below what they had last season. So, you know, they were happy with the points that he gained last season, but not this season. So, yeah, I think it is a bit unfair on him, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, Peter, you know, Dundee's first aim in any given season, you would feel, is to stay in the Scottish Premiership, right? You know, they've been the quintessential yo-yo club for a number of years. You know, they've gone up and down. That's what Dundee have been. He has stabilised them in the Premiership, albeit certainly it didn't go as well as what he would have liked. Finishing 10th, not ideal. Going down to the last day, again, they would not have wanted to be in that position. However, they never, you know, it was never out of their own hands. It was always in their own hands. And that's a massive thing, particularly when you think of that last game of the season going to St Johnstone, a Tayside derby. They had nothing to lose or to play for. St Johnstone were already down. So, you know, they certainly could play with freedom, but they got the job done. And that's all you could have asked. I mean, I just feel, is Tony Docherty perhaps became a bit of a victim of his own success from last season? That he's maybe alleviated their expectations and that's now fell below that?
Possibly. I mean, I like your phrase you used, yo-yo club, because that is exactly the phrase that came into my head. I mean, Dundee for years were very much like that. You know, they'd kind of get relegated, promoted, relegated, promoted. And as you said, Tony Docherty did seem to stabilise, then perhaps raise the expectations with a decent season last season. But perhaps they are maybe getting ideas, maybe not, but it's not right to say ideas above the station, but they maybe one season in the top six and think they can sustain it. They're perhaps looking at what Stevie Robinson has done at St Mirren and thinking, why aren't we doing that? You know, 3 years in a row in the top six. But it's a strange one, but I think they have, as Demi correctly said, they did throw a fair bit of money at it this year. And if we're being absolutely honest, Dundee's survival for me is entirely down to Simon Murray's goals, because they shipped a lot of goals at the back, and it was Simon Murray, I think, in the main, who has ensured that they stayed up. I mean, what a great signing, in fairness to the guy. But it'd be interesting to see the route Dundee go down. The statement in there, restructure, makes me think they'll go for like a head coach and a director of football. And that being the case, the Sean Maloney thing, as a head coach with an experienced director of football above him, might not be the most ridiculous shout that I've ever heard. But I'll be interested to see where they go with that. But they've taken the decision, as we know in this day and age, the trigger's pulled a lot quicker with most clubs now in terms of managers, and head coaches and whatnot. The demands of getting results and, you know, success and staying up, or European places, winning trophies. If you don't get that, you know, you're in trouble. But whether they feel that Tony Dock couldn't really do any more, you know, time will tell whether it's the right move. But I think Dundee are always going to be a club that maybe is kind of mid-table or down, fighting amongst the dross in the Premier League. I don't think they're ever going to be a top four side with the best will in the world. But certainly at times this season, some of the results they got against, as I say, Rangers and Celtic, probably should have beaten both. Remembering the games, but again, they conceding too many goals, even in the games where they played well. And perhaps they looked at that and thought he never fixed the defence over the course of the season. So, but it's one of those things. Dundee fans have their own views. Maybe some will be thinking, it's the right thing. If you get Dundee at heart, maybe there's maybe things we don't. Maybe things that we don't know, or we don't feel that they'll be looking at more closely than us. But it's certainly, I didn't expect it this morning. Put it that way.
No, I mean, is there any part of this, Demi, that could also come down to what's happening across the street at Dundee United? Because, of course, that's your rivals. I mean, I was going to say city rivals, but it's their street rivals, because they're literally across the road from each other. Albeit that will be changing in the near future, because Dundee are looking to relocate, although they'll not be too far away, because they'll still be in Dundee. But does the fact that Dundee United come up for the Championship straight into fourth, European football next season, has that played any part in it? Because mean, Tony Docherty done a similar job to what Jim Goodwin's done at Dundee United last season. He got them top 6. Now, okay, Dundee United are, as I say, 4th in getting European football, but take that out of the equation, that you'd like to think that didn't feature in it, that there's a feeling of, well, we should be doing better than United.
And yeah, so your first point there about the moving ground, yeah, I believe that they've had permission to build their new ground behind Camperdown Park, just off the Kingsway. So I believe that that's not going to be completed anytime before I leave here. So I think it's another few years in the line yet. But yeah, I mean, I don't think you can take that into consideration, about Dundee United getting Europe, because Dundee United should never, I mean, obviously league tables don't lie, so they should have been, but, Dundee United are a club that should never have been relegated, and I think it was just bonkers that they were, it was similar with Hearts the year they got relegated, Hearts aren't a club that, should be in the Championship, so, yeah, I don't really think you can look at it like that, because Dundee United, they are, Dundee fans will obviously hate to admit it, but Dundee United are a bigger club. They've got more money, they've got better players. So you'd like to think that didn't come into it, because Dundee United are a club who are expected to finish in at least the top 6 and be pushing for Europe. So yeah, it's an interesting one, but yeah, I'd like to hope that didn't come into their consideration for sacking him.
Yeah, I mean, you can't help but ask the question and think it, Peter, when, it's always tough when your neighbours have surpassed you, basically. It's always going to be a difficult one. You always want to do better than your rivals. And I'm sure as a Motherwell fan, you had massive sympathy for Hamilton Accies, as the crow flies with that sort of stuff. But at the same time, regardless of what your rivals are doing, you've got to look at your club. What are the realistic expectations? I don't know what the aims that were set out to Tony Docherty at the start of the season were for Dundee. If they said to him at the start of the season, Tory, it's got to be top 6 again, and then he fails to meet that, then fair. That's fair enough for them to say, well, he's got to go. But he's also had a set of circumstances this season that's been difficult. He loses Luke McCowan midway through it. That doesn't help. That's a massive blow, and he didn't really have a lot of time to try and replace that. He then had Lyle Cameron in and out in the last few months. He obviously signed the pre-contract to come to Rangers. Injury problems, I think there was as well, but I think there was elements of that kicked into it. He'll also, I'm sure, if you asked him, he'll point to a number of absolutely ridiculous officiating decisions that took place involving his team the last few weeks in particular, that he might feel has cost him as well. But I don't know that this is the correct decision that they've made. Perhaps we'll see who they appoint, but I can't quite get the thinking behind it. Surely he'd done enough to get another season, because if you wanted more, then you should have gave him more money, surely.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, I think the what you alluded to there might be stuff we don't know, i.e. maybe kind of targets set by the board that only people within Dundee might know. I like the interesting point you both made about local rivalries, and you shouldn't judge yourself on what your other clubs in an area are doing. Across the world, everybody does it. You guys will do it in Glasgow. Hearts and Hibs will do it. Man United, Man City do it. Liverpool, Everton, everybody will kind of judge how was their season. But if their rivals were above you in the table or won a trophy and you didn't, you'd be like, oh, it will hurt. And I think that's fair to say. Obviously, we're in the unique position that there's only absolute tosh round about the Lanarkshire area. I do have a degree of sympathy for Accies, genuinely, for the reasons for their demotion. But if there's been, it looks like there was a handful of problems that they had and that they were kind of sanctioned for, so it wasn't just one thing. Unfortunately, the situation, it's the coaches and players that suffer through it for administration issues that were not there doing, and they didn't have a lot of time because only a couple of games to go when they were told, oh, by the way, you're now 6 points adrift, I think it was, in the relegation place. So, thanks very much. It's difficult, but that sometimes stuff happens to football. And yeah, I mean, I know Dundee certainly had a few, to get back to Dundee, just made a few bad decisions. But I mean, every club could point to that. I mean, Dundee's probably some in their favour as well. But obviously, when you're losing games, you only want to point towards the ones that went against you. And I'm sure you guys might have something to say potentially about the lack of goal line technology. But overall, it's, your results are your results. The league table tends not to lie. Whether Dundee regret this, as you say, remains to be seen. And who, it may well be they had set a higher target following the previous year finishing in 6th place. But sometimes, as you say, losing players, you need to kind of make allowances for that. I mean, we were a ton of injuries all season, but you can't make that. We can't use that as an excuse all the time. It's if we had a full squad for the whole season, then who knows? But you never get a full squad for the whole season, so you have to just roll with the punches, and that's what Dundee had to do as well. And they were good enough to stay up, but I think that was just about all. I think if they'd ended up in the relegation playoff, they probably couldn't have had too much complaint. But they'll have to fight another season, and we'll see. The proof of the pudding will be in the eating next season, as they say.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing you would say, Demi, turn our attention to who could be next. They have an interesting dynamic at Dundee. So Gordon Strachan is the technical director there. He's still at the club. It seems that Sean Maloney right now is the main name being mentioned. And by the way, folks, just to clue you in, before we come on air, we mentioned Sean Maloney to Demi, and Demi hadn't heard of Sean Maloney, which makes me feel absolutely ancient.
Never felt older. Cheers, Demi. Thanks for
that. But of course, as Peter will remember as well, Sean Maloney and Gordon Strachan do have a prior relationship with one another, both having been at Celtic at the same time. Of course, Strachan was the manager. I mean, if that's the kind of route they're going down, and Strachan's thinking, let me get one of my guys in the door, is that potentially so they're looking for a gamble? Because his only other spell in management in Scottish football was a 19-game run in charge of Hibs that didn't go well.
Yeah, I mean, we've said it, about our own hunt for a manager. Every appointment's a gamble. Whether you appoint Jurgen Klopp or whether you appoint Barry Ferguson, just as an example that we've just had. Everything's a gamble. Because just because they're good at another club doesn't mean they'll be good at Dundee. Or just because he was bad at Hibs doesn't necessarily mean he'll be bad at Dundee. So yeah, it's speaking about a gamble. Everyone is, but I think one of the things that, you do need to be successful is that sort of, prior relationship. So, if that is what they choose to go down and, he's got that relationship with Gordon Strachan, it could be, that could be beneficial for him in the interview for the new manager. But yeah, it's an interesting one to see who they do appoint. But, I was speaking to a Dundee fan this morning and, he said that he's really hoping that it's not Maloney who comes in. Why, I don't know. He didn't justify it. He just said he really hopes it isn't Maloney.
Maybe it's the fear, Peter, of the spell he had at Hibs. In fairness to him, after he left Hibs, he did take over at Wigan Athletic. He was at them for actually quite an extended period of time. When you look at it, he joined there in January 2023, and he was sacked on my birthday, the 2nd of March 2025. Is when he got sacked for them. So he spent just over 2 years there. I'll just, before I get your opinion on him, I'll give you his stats overall as a manager at both clubs. So, but at Hibs, he played 19, he won 6, drew 6, lost 7, with a win percentage of 31.6%. At Wigan Athletic, 115 games played, 42 won, 33 drawn, 40 lost. Overall record means that's 134 games played, 48 games won, 39 drawn, 47 lost, and a 35.8% win percentage record as a manager overall. Now, that is at two clubs who admittedly are not necessarily teams, or certainly when he took over Hibs, who necessarily been flying high in recent years. But that's is that not a concern that he's such a young manager who seems to have been having a tough time? I mean, he seems to win as many games as he loses. And I think for a team like Dundee, that's the sort of records that could see you getting relegated next season, or at the very least in that playoff that they obviously want to avoid.
Possibly. I mean, the obviously the kind of wins and loss ratio are fairly even, so it gives smack of kind of mid-table type of kind of results and placings and whatnot. But obviously at that time Wigan had a lot of financial troubles, and I think they had points deductions, and the time it went into Hibs they were a basket case, which that doesn't exactly narrow down the time frame, does it? But in fairness, other managers have gone to Hibs and have failed, and you thought, well, why have they failed there? But as Demi rightly points out, you've seen, I dare say, I know I have it. Mother will think, why are we signing this player? He's been rubbish at there and somewhere else, and then he comes to us and suddenly he's flying. Conversely, you've had players and managers come in and think, oh, this guy's going to be absolutely smashing, and they've been bloody awful. So there's no guarantee. I think the best thing you can do with a manager or a player is, give them the opportunity to show what they can do. I mean, a year or so ago at Motherwell, we got a guy, Theo Bayer, who was hopeless at St Johnstone. Hopeless. Then he came to us the first 6 months. Didn't look great, but we started to find a bit of form. Second half of the season, brilliant, banging in the goals, and get a move to Ozair for £1.5 million. Ridiculous. Never seen that coming. Right? But there you go. So I think give them a chance. As you say, I think the relationship, Maloney and Strachan, which they had, I think Maloney got a lot of his Scotland caps under Strachan as well. So they obviously have a trust there. If they perhaps get a decent budget, and there's a trust there that Maloney knows he'll have the time to come in and develop a team. If Strachan is the buffer between him and the board, he might get the time to develop the squad and build them up to being a consistent team, challenging for the top six and having cup runs. But it should be interesting. But I dare say there might be other names in the frame as well. Who knows? This is one that was thrown out quite quickly. But whether the press know something or whether it was in the offing before the bullet was fired in Tony Docherty's direction, we don't know. But I think it sounds like it might be a fairly quick appointment, the way that the statement read as well.
Yeah, it does sound like they've possibly in the background been doing the work on this before making the decision. I suppose at the end of the season as well, now they've no more games to play. They can take their time before the transfer window opens in June. Lockeye, the view saying Dundee United won 16, drew 8 and lost 15. They get Europe this season. That's true, Lockeye. I mean, that's the inconsistencies of the Scottish top flight when it comes to the teams that are in that mid-table berth. That's why Hibs form, in the second half of this season, and the consistency they built has been remarkable. Got them third place.
Can I just say on that, Connor? Well done to the Hibs board for not panicking and sacking him. Some people might say it's because he was a club legend. They didn't, but the fact they didn't, and then look at the run they went on. So there's perhaps a lesson to be learned there as well, that give the manager time to turn it around, and look what he did. Fair play. They had a marvellous kind of last 5-6 months.
But they did. They absolutely did, and I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, they've got to be, if not first, probably second, at least in the form table since the turn of the year, Hibs, which is just remarkable. But it just shows. In terms of Tony Docherty, Demi, quickly, we obviously know that Derek McInnes has gone to Hearts. Could we see the two of them reuniting? Could Derek McInnes maybe pick up the phone and say, listen, fancy getting the band back together and rejoining him? Or could we see Kilmarnock potentially put the feelers out for Tony Docherty? A similar vein to Derek McInnes' style, I suppose. So it depends if they're wanting to radically change things. But it does feel like he's a decent enough manager that surely clubs in and around that area of the table would be interested in.
You know what? I think you're the fourth person to say to me today, does he go and join, does Docherty go and join Derek McInnes at Hearts? So you're not the only one thinking that, because there's been a few people, say that to me today. I think that could be, that would work, I mean, I've heard rumours, again, it's only rumours, so probably not true, but, there's rumours that Stephen Naismith's going to go to Kelly. Do I think Kelly will take Docherty? Probably not. Kelly finished above Dundee this season, and what I believe with a lesser budget, given how much Dundee put into this season. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure Kelly had less money this season. And they finished above Dundee. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not really sure that Kelly would, go for Tony Docherty, but could be wrong.
Yeah, but time will tell. We'll wait and see how that goes. Of course, Stephen A. Smith is heavily linked there. Makes sense. He's got connections with the club, and that's where he started his career as a player. So I could see the attraction. Although a word of caution for Kilmarnock would be how dreadful his Hearts side were at the start of the season. The wheels fell off there for him. But listen, that doesn't necessarily mean he couldn't go in and do a job for them. On the subject of Derek McInnes then, Peter, quickly, obviously we all knew he was going to Hearts. That was common knowledge for the past sort of 2 weeks, really, since Neil Critchley gets sacked. I think a good appointment for Hearts. I actually feel like for the first time since they brought Robbie Nielsen back, I'm sitting going, that's a sensible appointment long term for Hearts to make, because he can build there and he'll not be fazed by the pressures of a club like Hearts, having spent as long as he did up at Pittodrie, obviously at Aberdeen. So I think this could be a real good match for both sides, albeit he's got some work to do in the transfer window in the summer.
I think so, yeah. I mean, it does seem like a very, very sensible Hearts appointment, which when you think back to previous regimes at Tynecastle, let's say, sensible wasn't really a word that normally was associated by previous owners and whatnot. But I mean, whether, McInnes did a pretty decent job at Kelly, did a pretty decent job at Aberdeen. Whether his style of football has always been pleasing on the eye is another matter. But at the end of the day, results are what matters first and foremost, if we're being brutally honest. We'd all like our teams to win trophies by playing silky soccer week in, week out, but it's not going to happen. I think if we're all honest, if we could play great football but win as much as you lose, or be turgid and horrible at times but win trophies, or maybe in our case get the odd, a League Cup or into Europe, whatever, I'd be like, yes, please, I'll chew my hand off for that. We can all be, we can have the ideals about the style of football and how it should be played, but it's about success. That's top and bottom of it. And I think McInnes will, if he's given the time and the budget, I think he'll certainly bring that to Hearts, because if he can do it with Kelly, his knowledge of the transfer market, I think, would lend him to bringing in some good players into Hearts. Whether he was able to persuade Lawrence Shankland to stay around a wee bit as well might be another option. But no, I think Hearts should be much, much better next season. Difficult for them to be a lot worse, I think, when you look at the season as a whole.
Well, that is true, Demi. I mean, we have that bizarre scenario where when you look at the table, Hearts actually finished with more points than St Mirren, but that's because Hearts were playing the bottom six. St Mirren, however, were unbeaten against the top six, which is massively impressive, you've got to say. But let's not kid ourselves here, Demi. Derek McInnes done Kilmarnock a favour when he took them over at first, because he did not need to go into the Championship as a manager. He was above that level. He is a top flight manager in this country. And you can debate whether that is strictly here or whether that translates to leagues elsewhere, but he's certainly a Scottish top flight manager. So when he took them over to get them back up, that was a huge coup for Kelly. People thought that's a very good piece of business, and now with him leaving and going to Hearts, I just wonder, without the distractions of European football to play next season as well, and it's very early doors, but you'd have to consider that Hearts could be up there as the favourites to really challenge for third spot again next season.
Yeah, I mean, look what you just said there about him going to the Championship. That leads on to a point I was going to say. Yeah, I mean, obviously he went to the Championship. He wanted to better Kelly. He didn't want to be like, oh, look at me, I'm managing in the Scottish Premiership. A club approached him. He said, yeah, and he really he thrived in trying to, make them a better team, get them promoted again. And I think you can already see, he wants to do that with Hearts. I mean, his interview this morning, when it was officially announced, I don't know if any of you have seen it, but, he was like, teams used to be, scared to come to Tynecastle. And he goes, and, this season they haven't been. He goes, obviously, like, we want them to enjoy, their warm up and all that. But when the game starts, we want them to really we want our opponents to, really be under the pressure and really feel really feel scared to be at Tynecastle like they used to. So, you can see again, it's not all just about him. He wants to better Hearts. It's not just that, oh, look who I'm manager of. In his first interview, it was all about the fans, making it better for them and making other teams almost suffer when they come to Tynecastle. So yeah, he seems to be a manager that, when he goes somewhere, his main motivation is, to better the club.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And as I say, I have all the confidence that he'll do a decent job at Hearts. Okay, we'll mop up a couple of other wee things. Peter, the Steelmen. Let's have a wee chat about them since we've got you here. Ultimately, an 8th spot finish for Motherwell this season. Not a disaster by any manner of means, you'd say, but it feels to me that the departure of Kettlewell really feels like the turning point that kind of took Motherwell out of that top 6. And even though, when you look at it, the last game before the split, under the lights at Fir Park, it was an opportunity missed, that 0-0 draw. One of the most boring games we've ever seen, it has to be said, considering what was riding on it. But is that maybe how you feel about this season? Opportunity missed maybe to get into that top 6? Or are you just thinking, well, you know what, it is what it is, and you move on to next season?
Well, there's a few different ways of looking at it. Historically, though, Motherwell's kind of average position since like we started in the leagues is 8th, right? And bear in mind there was times where we won the league once, 1932. We don't go on about it though. But we've been second, third, and sometimes we've been like in the lower divisions. So our average position is 8th. So underachieving, overachieving, we're probably just where we maybe, kind of are expected to be. Early in the season, there was maybe the opportunity where top 6 was an option, but at the point where Stuart Kettlewell left, we were in a major downward spiral, and top 6 was there was going to be no chance of it. And at that point, we were hurtling towards being really involved in a relegation scrap. I think the big thing we need to do this summer is we've got 11 players in on loan. We've got about another 11 or 12, I think it is, at least, that are out of contract. So Michael Wimmer is not going to have much time off, put it that way. We need to get a lot of players out the door. Frankly, there's a lot of dross that Stuart Kettlewell signed. We need to bring in players that fit in what Michael Wimmer wants to do. The way we played against Dundee at Fir Park in his first home game, and the most recent game at Ibrox, where we kind of had a high press, where we pressed the game high, won the ball high off the back four, and then we're attacking, putting teams under pressure like that, getting the ball, zipping it around. That was probably one of our best performances of the season. But we don't have the players, to do that system at the moment. They don't have the legs, don't have the energy. So we need to get in players who can play that way, particularly in the kind of central midfield area and going up and down the flanks. It's a typical Motherwell season. It's a right good high points and some absolutely awful lows. But I think, as I say, it depends who we bring in. We could get we're going to have probably 10, 11 new faces on the door. We need to reduce the squad, yet still bring in 10 or 11, which shows you how many players it's going to be.
Because 36 first team players is, for a club the size of Liverpool, is absolutely ridiculous. That is just.
We've had a lot of injuries, and probably Kettlewell kind of stockpiled because of the injuries. Probably our best, most gifted, lethal striker, Apostolos Stamatolopoulos. I just really said that just to show you that I could. Has had a lot of injuries, but when he plays, he's a proper striker. And I think if we had him for more of the season, I might have taken a lot of chances. Like yesterday's game, for example, up at County, second half, we should have had 3 or 4 in the net. There's no doubt about it, but we ended up scraping a 1-1 because we're not clinical. And I think that's been a big problem as well. Obviously, giving away daft goals, that's a standing item. But we need to build I think.
I think that's the thing that's been recognisable this season, because you mentioned Theo Bear earlier,
Yeah.
and when I think of Motherwell, I think a team who tend to always have that one real good striker up top. Motherwell, to be fair, over the years have found a way to keep churning out good strikers and bringing them in.
Yeah.
You know, you go back to like John Sutton, William Moult, Curtis Main had the best time in his career was at Motherwell. There was no question about it. He was incredible for Motherwell. Even Tony Watt in his first spell was doing really well before he went to Dundee United, and then things went off a cliff for him. I still maintain I don't get what his logic was to leave at that time. He should have stayed with how well he was playing. And then obviously, Theo Bear last season. You've got other utility guys like Ryan Bowman and others who've done really well in there. But this season, it has felt, other than a post, I'm just going to abbreviate his name now. I'm not even going to attempt to do this right. Other than him, who has had issues, it has felt like that's been a thing that's just been missing from Motherwell.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's other ones as well. Recently, Kevin Van Veen had 29 goals. And going back a wee bit further, a guy who was much maligned to start with, but was absolutely magnificent for his Michael Higdon, who played at St Mirren before that. Big Higgy came in and we had a wee Finnish striker, Henrik Oyama, and a guy who went to Rangers, Nicky Law. That was a great wee attacking line. And Big Higgy was absolutely sensational. I don't know if you mind that. He was a Player of the Year, I think, 2013 season. And he got the award that night and ended up in the jail because I think they had a fight when one of the posh pubs in Glasgow. I think it was David McCracken, who was at St Johnstone at the time. So his legendary status lives on at Motherwell. But that was the problem, though. We didn't have an out-and-out goal scorer. We'll get 6 or 7 players who've had like 5 or 6 goals this season. But the last thing I want to say about is obviously we're going to be losing Lennon Miller for a ton of money this summer. The boy's not even 19 yet. That's the thing. I don't think he's anywhere near his peak, but he's already he's so composed in the ball. He doesn't get ruffled. He can. You're right. You're absolutely right, Graham. Big Higgy, got to love him. I think Lennon's going to go overseas. To a league where I think he's going to play week in, week out. There's been talk about genuinely like Italy or Spain. I mean, you look at obviously Italy, like Lewis Ferguson, Billy Gilmour, Scott McTominay. These guys are playing week in, week out there, and are showing that Scottish boys can go abroad and play week in, week out and be stars of the show. And I hope Lennon does that. He's got the temperament, he's got the ability. And he's got, obviously, his dad, Lee Miller, was a professional for many years, so he's got the head screwed on. And I wish the laddie all the best because he's been nothing but magnificent for us. And I know he's going to. Yes, give him his full name. Yes, that's right, Robert. I didn't know that was his middle name, but thanks for joining in.
That's the gaffer. That's Martin. He is a huge fan of Lennon Miller and is to this day driven mad by the fact that Rangers have never approached to go and sign the boy, which, to be fair, I find, I mean, listen, if he goes abroad, as you say, then you wish him well and you hope he does go along the same vein as a Lewis Ferguson and guys like that. But, and I'll throw to you, Demi, quickly wait as well, it is a mark of Rangers and Celtic to a degree as well, why we're letting these players go abroad and not bringing them into the fold at our clubs. I mean, Rangers are bringing in Lyle Cameron, but him and Lennon Miller actually have worked quite well together in the Scotland Under-21 setup this season. You've got to say, and yet we're just not going to use him. He's going to go abroad. He'll probably do well, and we'll sit back and go, "Wow, we could have had that player."
Yeah, look, I mean, my first point. I mean, we've got this snobbery around signing players from Scotland. If we just don't seem to want them. But they'll go abroad and then we'll go, oh wow, why didn't we sign them? And by that point we try and sign them and they're worth far too much money. So I think it's the snobbery that we appear to have towards, other Scottish teams. But, my second point is, had we have signed him, would we have ruined him? I mean, he played with Bailey Rice. We signed Bailey Rice. How many minutes of football has he played? So yeah, obviously we should have signed him, but if we had signed him, would we have would we have digressed him as a football player?
Yeah. I mean, it's a fair point, Peter, and we've seen it in the past, Jake Hasty, for example, left Motherwell probably too early and came to Rangers, and that didn't work. I mean, he's down south now and he's doing okay, to be fair to the boy, but it's not what it should have been for him. He had all the promise and talent in the world, him and Davy Turnbull, and Welsh, you could say Davy Turnbull had a few good seasons at Celtic. We're seeing another one who seems to have faded into obscurity.
Well, that's it. He's down at Cardiff. In fact, I was speaking to him at the Motherwell Killer game. He was up for that. It was a wee blather with him. I think he's had a few injury problems down there as well. But I says, you'll need to go to Cardiff because they're obviously now in League One.
Relegated.
Yeah, and the thing about it is, I know obviously played for Celtic. You might not be a big fan of him, but let's be honest. What a player he was. He's still got that ability. If he gets he deserves to play at a much better level. He's got a kind of similar style to Lennon in terms of a very languid style.
Getting back to Motherwell next season, Peter.
Well, you don't think I didn't try? I don't think we could. I don't think we could afford these wages. You know what I mean? Although I did remind him that when I did my hospitality stint at Motherwell, and I occasionally covered as the stadium announcer, I did announce his first goal at Fir Park, and I did his man of the match interview as well. So not that his career is entirely down to me, but his career is probably entirely down to me.
Yeah, aye. I mean, that's the thing as well, Ron. You must feel, because there's another one we should touch on as well, and Alan Campbell, another graduate of the Motherwell youth system. And I tell you what, does it not maybe grate on you slightly that you're seeing him in a Dundee United shirt right now, and you probably could have had him back, because if he's at Dundee United, Motherwell could have took him back, no problem.
Well, that's it. He was at Luton, and he obviously helped them get promotion to the Premier League. But then he didn't get a chance in the Premier League with Luton, and I really wish he had. He's a wee tiger in midfield. I love wee Al, brilliant wee player. And I would love to have him back at Motherwell, but perhaps the money was on. I think he was at Charlton before United. Perhaps their money was too high for their budget at that point. And as you say, United, obviously City Club, they'll have more money. They'll be able to chuck more money at them than we can. But a great wee player. I love him.
Yeah, well, that's it. He's had 10 appearances for Dundee United. Listen, he's still a young lad, and he's only 26. Do you know what I mean? That's plenty of life left in the tank for him. Okay, before we park it, I wasn't going to bring this up, but actually, I think it's always interesting to have these wee conversations when you've got somebody who's removed from the government hole, as it were. It's been reported, and it was mentioned, I'm sure, on the Monday Night Rabble, but it's obviously been spoke about today, Demi, that the SFA have apparently launched an investigation into comments made by John Brown on Rangers TV during the Hibs and Rangers game yesterday. I don't think I have to tell you what incident it was relating to, Peter, somehow. But John Brown did make the comments where the goal that was but wasn't given from Nico Raskin. He uttered the words, "It's corrupt." Tom Miller then attempts to correct him and say, "Look, I don't know that we can say that." And John Brown says, "Well, I'm saying it." And to be fair to me, Tom Miller, I'd be out with him right there. I am not about to tell John Brown what he can and cannot say. Absolutely not. But are we in I feel like I get his comments were a bit over the slow, Demi, right? But I feel like we're in a bit of a twilight zone here. This is a club channel we're talking about, and okay, that then means that it can be associated firmly with the club and say, well, you've let that come out. But it's still John Brown's own personal opinion. And on a club channel, you're going to get biases. You're going to get things that are a little bit more emotive than you would expect from, Sky Sports or whatever. And by the way, just to highlight even further, Chris Sutton and Chris Boyd and others on Sky Sports regularly say these types of things. Why is it different just because John Brown's on Rangers TV? He's there as a pundit, not as an employee of Rangers Football Club or making that statement on behalf of Rangers Football Club.
Yeah, look, Kenny, personally, I think, it's happened on a Rangers channel. Let's have a pop at them, John Brown has said it because he knows that there's nothing the Scottish FA can do about it. He's a club ambassador. He's not a manager. He's not a player. There is nothing that the Scottish FA can do about it. And he'll be aware of the fact that there's nothing they can do about it. But yeah, like you say, it's absolutely no different to watching both Chris Boyd and Chris Sutton on, on Sky Sports, because, I almost don't even enjoy watching. Not that I often do, but I often don't even enjoy listening to the, Sky Sports interviews or anything back, from the studio, because, there's examples on both sides where, Chris Sutton will say, against us, oh, that's a penalty every day of the week, if Celtic are given one, and then, if it's given for us against someone else, oh, that's never a penalty. And Chris Boyd's the same, they almost take the rules of football out of it just to be like, oh, well, I'm a Rangers fan, so I'm going to say this. So, it's literally no different to that. But, any excuse to launch an investigation and get Rangers on the front page of the news.
Well, Peter, this is why I'm glad you're here. I flagged up the comment there for Neil, but I realised that comment just completely covers your face, Peter. See, as we flag it up on the screen.
No one's complaining about that.
Well, I wasn't going to say that you'd never look better. But it can feel like that to us as Rangers fans, and I'm fully on board with what Demi says, as you can imagine. I get the emotion behind it. I mean, what's your kind of take on it? Is it in your mind, because obviously Motherwell have got their own fan channel as well, right? Fan channel, club channel. But is it really any different to somebody in Sky Sports saying it? You can't then punish Sky Sports as the FA and go, well, you're bringing our game into disrepute, you need to be fit. Why? They're the broadcasters. By all means, if anybody's got an issue with it, then you could, in theory, report it to Ofcom, because any broadcaster has to be licensed by them. I doubt they'd give a shit, to be honest with you, Peter.
Yeah.
But I don't see why Rangers should be held accountable for the comments of a pundit, especially when the main commentator, Tom Miller, did push back on it. So he did proffer that other side and say, well, actually, we can't really say that.
Yeah. I think, obviously, it's a kind of almost like a kind of cartoon on Sky Sports with Boyd and Sutton just kind of like digging at each other, and it's taken away a lot of the better punditry that you should be expecting for the money you're paying to watch Sky Sports. Regarding the John Brown thing, I'm going to play devil's advocate. You would expect nothing less. I think the problem, whether the SFA can or can't, or whether there's any precedence, I really don't know if anything's happened before. But if someone who is affiliated with any club in some way, that might be the problem, where if you say John Brown's an ambassador or something, if he has an official role, then they're not. I don't think they'd be saying that that's the official view of Rangers Football Club. But if any club official of any description says something which is controversial, they're going to be looking at it. For my own opinion, I don't think there's any corruption in Scottish football. I think we only need to look at the awful decisions that most clubs over the course of the season have had to suffer. I mean, we've had some given against us that are terrible. Some we got a few in our favour that have went, geez, I don't know how that happened there, but we'll take it. And if we're all honest, we'll all look at that as well, with some decisions, in our favour. Tony Watt's goal at Firth Park. Still not over it. I'm still not over it. But joking apart, though, but I mean, we that went in your favour. It shouldn't have. We would stuff like the goal. One of the Dundee, for example, the other week, we got where the boy ran back. He didn't really get involved, but he was given offside. That'd have made it 2-0 to Dundee, and they probably would have beaten us that day. And instead, we won. So I just think referees are pretty poor. The VAR officials are probably even worse. I think we need to get to grips over this summer. Willie Collum has got to earn his money. If guys are consistently making bad decisions, either in the VAR studio, on the line, or in the middle, get new guys in, or get them in all summer training, because we can't have this situation where a lot of games, cups, championships are decided by a referee's opinion. Even though we've got VAR, it still comes down to the opinion of the referee, and we need to get goal line technology. It's not just because of what happened at Easter Road. If you've got VAR, you kind of need to have goal line technology, otherwise it takes away a lot of what VAR's trying to do as well. I mean, what is the point in having half a system? You know what I mean? You've got to have the goal line technology. However many times it will be useful. You know, there was a game with Hibs and Celtic where Celtic thought they'd get a winning goal. No, the ball went out the park, and they weren't sure if it was, because when the ball's in the air and you don't have a goal line camera, you can't properly tell. The one perhaps at Easter Road looked a little bit more obvious. But there was that one in the years ago in the World Cup where the ball looked out, but the camera from above showed that there was a tiniest wee portion of the ball still on the line. Yeah. I'm not saying that's what happened at Easter Road, but it wouldn't surprise me if there was the tiniest wee microcosm of football still on the line. Not that the VAR official or ref didn't guess, let's be honest. But that needs to come into the game if we're going to be taken seriously, because it will help the referees get it right as well, because that's what we all want, the right decisions. Although some will go against us. But if there's consistency across the board, then you accept it. And that's the greatest thing we need.
Well, yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, Demi, just very quickly because we'll round off. It's maybe half an hour and it's been 50 minutes. But as it turned out, there was more to talk about than I had initially planned for. But you talk about consistency of refereeing, that's one thing. There's also got to be consistency from the SFA in regards to these investigations and how they're dealt with. Because we all remember, and I'm not, this isn't about a whataboutery or a tit for tat, but last season, Brendan Rodgers actually did call the officials incompetent in an interview after the Hearts game where he had his side had a player sent off harshly, yes, and he understandable the issue that he took with it. But he came out and called John Beaton incompetent, actually ignoring it was Don Robertson that sent him off and not John Beaton because he's on VAR. And his punishment for that, Demi, was a suspended 1-game touchline ban, which he never served, and a fine of just under £8,500. Now, if that's the precedent we're setting here, then given as John Brown is not a manager of Rangers Football Club, then at worst, I'd expect that maybe the SFA can come back and go, we're going to fine Rangers $3,000 and that's the end of the matter. Because if that's the precedent you're setting for the severity of these punishments, then it has to befit the crime. And John Brown was not the Rangers manager saying that. Brendan Rodgers was the Celtic manager and his punishment was fairly light, all things considered.
Yeah, I mean, that's your first problem there, expecting the Scottish FA to make things, standard across the board. Not even just, between Rangers and Celtic, just in general. Nothing's ever been, they don't seem to have any way they just don't seem to know how to punish everyone the same. And it's like, if you look at Hampden, Rangers and Celtic have had, I couldn't tell you now, however many tickets they've had taken off them for the next one. And was it a fine, I believe? And then if you look at Motherwell, they only had, correct me if I'm wrong, Peter, you guys didn't get a fine. You only got a suspended ban of fans at Hampden? I
think so, but I don't... Motherwell fans at Hampden's not going to be a regular thing. Might need to wait a few years before that kicks in. If I'm being honest.
Well, no, but just as an example, they get half of what Rangers and Celtic get. Do you know what I mean? They don't get both punishments; they get one.
Well, I think possibly maybe that is because obviously there's more Rangers fans than Motherwell fans and more Celtic fans than Motherwell fans. It was a bigger tifo and maybe caused a bigger delay. Maybe it's just down to numbers. On that instance alone, obviously, I know the point you're making in general, but who knows what goes on in these committee rooms? You know what I mean? Who knows?
But yeah, they just don't seem to know how to, set these sanctions out. So yeah, I mean, I would expect very little to be done. Even if the SFA do anything, I'd say I'd be shocked, but I wouldn't. But they really shouldn't be doing anything. He's not involved in the match day, anything that happens. What he said doesn't change the result of the game, and I mean. I don't agree with him. I don't think it is corruption. And I know it can, it can feel like that when you've had 4 or 5 decisions go against you, in a short space of time. But I don't think it's corruption. I think it's just lack of ability to do your job properly, And what I think doesn't help is I don't believe that half of those refs know the exact rules. Do we are struggling to understand this whole when you're offside, when you're not, what's a handball, what isn't. And I fully believe that the referees and those on VAR, they can't keep up with it either. So yeah, I don't think it's corruption. I just don't think it's very good refereeing or very good VARing.
I agree, totally agree. And to be fair, I don't like saying it, but I actually agree more with Brendan Rodgers' comments for last season when he said it was incompetence. I think that's exactly what it is. It is widespread, gross incompetence across the board. We do the VAR review show. We haven't done it for this month because it's been bloody busy, but we will do one before the season's out when the the last one drops. And to be fair to Billy Collin, he is trying. He speaks very well on the VAR review show. He does explain things. I just think sometimes he's sitting telling you this is the process that we're expecting them to follow. This is what they should be doing. And then you see an incident, you go, why have they not followed that process then? How is that? You look at the penalty incident between Dundee and Ross County, for example. All season, Billy Collins spoke about how the handball rule's different this year. It's not as harsh, and it's about a punishable handball. Is it natural? A defender being pulled back by an attacker, your arm's going to naturally up, and then your own player heading it onto you for a yard away. Come on, that's the kind of thing that frustrates the life out of you, because you just think, well, what are we doing? Are they just not listening? So I think what Leeds done in the summer, big time. However, Wheel Park, our conversation there, as I say, that's went almost double the length of time we expected, but as I said, it's never quiet in Scottish football. A few news stories coming out today that were worth mentioning. In terms of the Scottish Football Show, in case you are here tonight and you weren't around last night, you can catch the review show with myself and Martin from last night on the channel, by all means, if you want to hear our opinions on the final weekend's action of the Scottish Premiership season. Of course, we're done with the review shows for the season, but there is still a little bit of life left in the tank for us this season. We're going to do the watch along on Thursday. Thursday night, we're going to have a watch along for the first leg of the Scottish Premiership playoff between Livingston and Ross County, and then we'll get the return leg as well on the Monday. Well, it could be one of them, Peter. We'll do the second leg on the Monday, and then we'll have a wee break for a couple of weeks, and then we're going to do an end of season award show, because it's a tradition on the Scottish Football Show that we do it. Hopefully we'll get Peter on, because it'd be good to get somebody doling these awards out that isn't from a Rangers perspective. Although believe me, I'll be amazed if there's any Rangers player getting any award this year.
Mullible and awards, that's a nice combination that doesn't happen too often, so if I'm free, I'll be right up for that.
This is true. And then of course we do have, after that in the summer, coming soon, the Champion of Champions quiz here in the Scottish Football Show. Martin against Ian against Alan Brown, the three winners from the international break quizzes we've done as the season went on. I'll be your quiz master. Somebody will hopefully be doing the scoring for me, because I might lose track. But make sure you're tuned in for that as well. And then of course, we'll be back after the summer for the usual review shows. And if any breaking news does occur between now and then, i.e. somebody's probably going to get sacked tomorrow morning, then we will obviously cover that as well as and when it breaks. Until then, though, much appreciated. Demi, Peter, it was quite last minute, so delighted to get you on. Delighted to see you again on the show as well before the season, or just after the season ends. That's always a good thing. And of course, Martin's back at 12:30 p.m. tomorrow with the afternoon rabble, and then you've got your member show tomorrow night with Ian T and the crew there for that. So plenty to keep you occupied. Until then, take it easy, and we'll see you very